The year is 1944. Over the Pacific, a pitch-black night. A Japanese bomber glides through the air. Its pilot believes he's safe. There is no searchlight beam, no silhouette of an approaching fighter. Then, without any warning, the fuselage begins to tear apart under the hammering of 20mm cannon rounds. Within seconds, a ball of fire slams into the sea. The crew never even saw what hit them. What hit them wasn't a ghost. It was a glossy-black, 14-ton, three-man aircraft. In its nose, it carried a radar that could spot enemy planes in the dark from 8-10 kilometers away. Its name was the P-61 Black Widow. This video is the story of the first aircraft America designed from scratch as a night fighter. The Black Widow's job was clear from the day it was drawn: to own the darkness. So why was such an aircraft needed? The answer wasn't in Washington, it was in London. The year 1940, the darkest days of the Battle of Britain. After German bombers took heavy losses by day, they changed tactics. Now they came in the dark. Every night they rained down on London, and by morning another neighborhood of the city was buried in smoke. British fighters were helpless. They were trying to shoot at an enemy they couldn't see. But British engineers had invented something: airborne radar. A radar set small enough to fit inside an aircraft. The first sets fitted to Beaufighters and Blenheims were heavy and unreliable, but the principle had been proven. In September 1940, the Tizard mission crossed the Atlantic. They carried with them a device that American engineers couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the cavity magnetron. This was the key that would make airborne radar actually work. October 1940, Ohio, Wright Field. An engineer named Vladimir Pavleka, Northrop's chief of research, was called to a secret meeting with the US Army Air Corps. When he walked into the room, a file was placed in front of him, but he wasn't allowed to touch it. He couldn't take notes either. He would only commit what was said to memory. Inside was the description of an unusual aircraft, a night interceptor fighter. It would be able to see and identify enemy aircraft in the dark, carrying a device that didn't even have a name yet. This was an order. In those same weeks, the British Purchasing Commission delivered a similar request to Washington. What they wanted had never been done before: an aircraft built from scratch around the radar. On top of that, it had to have the endurance to loiter over London for 8 hours. This request landed on Jack Northrop's desk. You may have heard the name, the founder of the company that, years later, would create the B-2 stealth bomber. In January 1941, a contract was signed for 2 prototypes. In March, an order for 13 serviced SYP-61S came in. In December, the first production letter of intent. And then, in February 1942, the massive order for 410 aircraft. Not a single prototype had even flown yet. Then Jack Northrop sat down and began to draw one of the strangest looking aircraft in aviation history. Picture a P-51 Mustang, the most iconic fighter of the war. Single pilot, cramped cockpit, one engine. Now place the Black Widow beside it. Nearly twice the wingspan, empty weight close to 3 times that of a Mustang, 2 engines, each roughly 50% more powerful than the Mustangs, a cockpit holding not 1 but 3 crewmen. And this beast was still listed in the fighter category, because what was packed inside was enormous. In its nose, a huge radar. In its belly, 4 20mm Hispano cannons. Firepower capable of ripping apart a heavy bomber in just a few hits. On its back, a remote-controlled turret with 450 caliber Browning machine guns, and 2 Pratt and Whitney R 2,800 double Wasp engines, each capable of pushing out up to 2,250 horsepower. But I need to add a note here. On early production P-61S, when the turret rotated to certain angles, the aircraft's tail began to buffet. For this reason, after the 37th aircraft, the turret was removed from production. Most of the P-61S that flew the first combat missions in the Pacific fought with only the 4 cannons in their nose. Keep that detail in mind, it'll matter later. Stranger than the weapons was the way the aircraft flew. An aircraft this size had to be able to take off and land from small island strips. Northrop placed panels called spoilers on top of the wings and used them in combination with conventional ailerons. The result was that the Black Widow landed on runways no other aircraft of its size could land on, and pulled off maneuvers they couldn't pull off. There were also large fouler flaps, massive air brakes that extended from the rear of the wings. Thanks to these flaps, the Black Widow could shed speed faster than any fighter approaching its target. This matters, because in night fighting, overshooting your target meant starting the radar track from zero. The Black Widow didn't overshoot. In July 1944, this maneuverability was put to the test in England. The American senior command in Europe considered the Black Widow inadequate and was planning to re-equip the squadrons with British Mosquitoes. General Karl Spaatz settled the matter in a single way. He organized a fly-off. The 5th of July 1944. RAF Hearn. 1 P-61 won the Havilland Mosquito NF Mark the 17th. Colonel Winston Kratz, the director of night fighter training back in the States, put down a $500 bet that the Mosquito would win. The result wasn't what he expected. The Black Widow outclimbed the Mosquito at every altitude, outturned it in level flight, and with its fouler flaps demonstrated a tactical edge the Mosquito couldn't match. Kratz paid up though. Years later, he still wouldn't accept it, saying, "The British were lying just like soldiers, but the matter was closed. The Black Widow stayed in Europe." There was another mind game written into the surface of this aircraft. It's paint. Painting a night fighter black seems like the obvious solution. But MIT researchers and Northrop test pilots noticed something in the field. When a searchlight hit a matte black aircraft, the rough surface scattered the light, and the aircraft looked like a glowing patch of haze in the sky. So, matte black was the night fighter's enemy. The solution was to do the opposite. Not matte, but glossy black. A surface polished like a mirror. When searchlight beams struck this surface, instead of scattering back, they bounced off the main axis. Unless the searchlight operator hit the aircraft dead center, the light went elsewhere, and the aircraft remained invisible. A 14-ton beast, by the math of the right finish, vanished into the sky. Of course, the real weapon was neither the cannons nor the paint. The real weapon was sight. What it carried in its nose was the Western Electric SCR 720 radar, a device close to science fiction for its time. It could detect bomber-sized targets out to 8 or 10 kilometers. The parabolic antenna in the nose swept the sky. The pilot had a small screen on his front panel, but pilots rarely used it, because the radar operator in the back saw everything far better. Picture it this way. The radar operator in the back is looking at two screens. One shows the target's range, the other its bearing. The man speaks into the pilot's ear over the intercom. 3 kilometers, slightly right, a little below. The pilot turns the aircraft that way. In the darkness, nothing is visible, only the engine noise and the radar operator's voice. Then the pilot catches a small shadow through the windscreen, the exhaust flames of the German bomber, and the 4 Hispano cannons begin to speak. In the Pacific, first blood had been drawn before Europe. In the 30th of June, 1944, off Saipan, Lieutenant Dale Haberman and his radar operator Raymond Mooney of the 6th Night Fighter Squadron, flying a turretless P-61A named Moonhappy, caught an incoming Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber. What made it even more interesting was that a Zero fighter was flying escort beneath the Betty on-ground radar. The two had appeared as a single target. They closed to 700 feet and opened fire with the 4 nose cannons. The Betty exploded in midair. The Black Widow flew through the wreckage and returned to base with damage. It was the P-61's first confirmed victory in any theater. The first victory in Europe came 2 weeks later, the night of the 16th of July, 1944. Lieutenant Hermann Ernst and Edward Kopsel of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron hunted down a V-1 flying bomb over the channel. On the previous night's attempt, the loose-side tail cone of the Black Widow had collapsed inward during a high-speed dive, a known structural weakness of early P-61s. This night was different. Ernst closed in, opened fire, and the V-1 exploded. The Black Widow flew in Europe, in the Mediterranean, in the Pacific, and in the China-Burma-India theater. In total, it shot down 127 enemy aircraft and 18 V-21s. In Europe, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron led the way. with 43 confirmed kills the night of the 26th of December 1944, when they shot down 5 V-1S in a single night, became legend. In the Pacific, the 418th Night Fighter Squadron stood out. From that squadron, Major Carroll Smith became the P-61's only ace, the only name to cross the 5-victory threshold, finishing with a total of 7 kills. And now, the strangest victory story of all. The night of the 14th of August, 1945, the final hours of the war. From Leshima Airfield, a P-61B named Lady in the Dark of the 548th Night Fighter Squadron was vectored onto a low-flying target over the East China Sea. The target was a Japanese Nakajima fighter. Sources are still split on whether it was a Ki-43 Oscar or a Ki-44 Tojo. The Black Widow closed in. The Japanese pilot panicked, throwing the aircraft into sharp, low-altitude maneuvers. Before the crew could even pull the trigger, the Japanese aircraft, twisting and turning above the waves, slammed into the sea. Not a single round had been fired. The next night, August 15 to 16, the war was officially over, but some Japanese sorties were still flying. The same Lady in the Dark took off again, this time under the command of Major Lee Kendall. Nearly the same scene played out again. The Japanese pilot maneuvered wildly, the Black Widow stayed on him, and the Japanese aircraft slammed into the ground. Again, not a single round had been fired. These two nights were written into Lady in the Dark's record as the last aerial victories of the Second World War. Both had been won without firing a shot. The enemy pilots had panicked, lost control, and gone down. The Black Widow was simply there, and that was enough. That's why it carried that name. The Black Widow spider is a hunter that creeps up silently on its prey and strikes unseen. The P-61 was lethal for exactly the same reason. But there's a bitter side to this story. The P-61 made its first flight on the 26th of May 1942. Test pilot Vance Breese at the controls, the same man who had flown the prototype of the P-51 Mustang years earlier. Yet the Black Widow didn't reach the front until June 1944, meaning it only saw the last 14 months of the war. By that time, the Allies were already dominating the skies, Germany was already collapsing, and Japan was on the verge of exhaustion. The Black Widow was a genius that arrived late. If it had been ready in 1941, perhaps it could have changed those terrible nights over London. If it had been lent to the Soviets on the Eastern Front in 1942, perhaps the night bombings over Stalingrad would have been written differently. Perhaps. But here's the crucial point. The Black Widow didn't become a legend in the war, because there hadn't been time to become one. What it created was something more lasting. Back then, there was no word stealth yet, no concept called electronic warfare, no doctrine called the all-weather fighter. The Black Widow planted the seeds for all of these. The F-94 Starfire, the F-89 Scorpion, the F-101 Voodoo, the F-106 Delta Dart, all of them inherited the problems the P-61 had solved. Closing in on an unseen target in a blind sky, at closing speeds no one had ever flown before. Today, the AESA radar in the nose of the F-35, the electronic warfare systems of the F-22, their ancestor is that twin-tailed, glossy-black Northrop aircraft that flew during the last 14 months of the war. A total of 706 were built, 674 during the war, and another 32 after it ended. By the early 1950s, the F-82, Twin Mustang, and Jet Night fighters took over the mission. The last P-61 was retired in 1954. Today, only 4 complete P-61s remain in the world. 1 in Ohio, 1 in Virginia, 1 in Beijing, and 1 in Pennsylvania Moonlight Mistress, still being restored to flying condition. The Spitfire saved Britain. The Mustang escorted them to Berlin. The B-29 ended the war. The Black Widow did something different. It wrote the future. And it did it without making any noise. Because its work was silent. Its work was the dark. So what if the P-61 had never existed? If the SCR-720 hadn't flown in 1943, if Northrop hadn't established that design language, where would the American night fighter program have been in the early 1950s? When the Soviets sent bombers toward the United States, how would America have met them? Write it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. If this story moved you the way it moved me, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Happy flying!